This week on the Jerusalem Post podcast, the podcast hosts Jerusalem Post correspondents Amichai Stein, diplomatic correspondent, and Eliav Breuer, political correspondent, to discuss the ceasefire, the state of the ceasefire, the current state of the coalition, and how fragile it is, a Haredi draft bill that's currently being discussed, and other such issues that are the most prominent in today's society. This is the Jerusalem Post podcast. I'm your host, Jerusalem Report interim editor-in-chief, Tamar Uriel-Beeri, and I am joined by both of my co-hosts this week.
Hello.
Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief, Tzvika Klein.
Shalom.
And Jerusalem Post night editor, Sarah Ben-Nun.
What's up, Tamar?
Hey, guys.
Hi.
Welcome to the studio. This is so much fun.
It's the studio which is being in progress.
In development.
Exactly.
In
Development.
progress.
Our darling
It's going to
audience
look a lot
is
more-
with us for
yeah.
the process of growing into this space.
And you guys can't
We're holding
actually see
space.
We're holding space.
our listeners and viewers can't see the view that we could. I mean, Sarah
Oh.
can't really see it.
We
It's
have,
true. I'm
But
sitting
it's a
to the
beautiful.
window.
We have a beautiful Jerusalem skyline.
We have
Complete with
We see
cranes.
this amazing building. Yeah, well,
That's
cranes.
a nod to
But we see
the
this amazing building
growing.
called the Knesset. It's in fog. I feel like it's not only.
I'll tell
It's
you
a
what, it's
little
not
unclear.
It's
you
not.
know?
No, it's not metaphorical fog. He meant physical fog, but it's not fog. It's just dust from all the construction.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And also
Thank
the
you,
window might be
cranes.
dirty. But you know,
I
like
thought it
we
was
said.
dust from like all the like fights.
Ooh,
Like,
oh, you
Oh,
thought this was like a
dusty.
Yeah,
No, I
thought
literally.
there was something metaphoric. Going
No, I
on.
literally-
I don't
There
think
is-
the fog will keep us from being able to talk about.
Yeah, the fog of
big
war won't keep us.
issues.
Yeah, the big issues, and really, there have been really big issues. We are speaking on Wednesday, and
You
as
didn't
we're
say
speaking-
what a week.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Ooh.
Whew.
1, 2, 3, go.
What a week.
What a week.
Yeah, because things have happened, they have.
Yeah.
But currently, as we're speaking, there's currently a new IDF chief of staff being
Right.
sworn in, Eyal Zamir,
Mhm.
who has massive defense history in the IDF, in the defense ministry. So his and
He was the chief of staff, I think. Now
He was the director general
of the
Defense
Ministry.
yeah, no, the guy's like big in
He's
this.
big.
yeah,
I think
he's
he's
a-
also there seems to be like everyone agrees that this guy is good, that he's the right guy for the
So
job.
surprising, though.
Wait, that's what I found.
Listen, the
That
guy
would
has
surprise me too.
the guy has like a really impressive resume. But also, I wanted to know, and maybe I'm just like less educated on this, which I am. I don't know my Israeli history too well. Is it all too common that somebody who was technically already released from the IDF
It's happened.
goes
before.
back into
It
Yeah,
has.
it's happened.
Yeah. It's not super common, but it has.
Because-
Right. And also, it's not. It's pretty recent. It's not like it was like.
I also
many years
heard a
Yeah.
rumor. I don't know how true this is, but that he was up against Eliav to be chief of staff
I
at
think
that
so,
time.
yeah.
and during the previous round with that Benny Gantz kind of orchestrated
right,
and
as defense
and,
minister.
and
Right.
I think also at the time there was criticism towards Gantz that he sort of pushed Halevi
Or
through.
Gantz.
Gantz.
Yeah.
Depending on your accent, where you're from in the United
Mhm.
States. Yeah, like criticism towards Gantz for the process and the speed at which Halevi was kind of appointed.
Right.
Right.
And it seems like, unlike most political issues that take place today, there's just this pleasant, widespread agreement
Don't worry.
about this
so
man.
it's just now we're recording this on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
And about noon, I would say. And there were all these push notifications coming from the ceremony.
Yeah.
And obviously, Netanyahu bashed the outgoing chief of staff Herzi Levi and the
He
outgoing
also
chief of
thanked
staff.
him.
Right, but he also
It's very uncommon to see that kind of thing happening. Like usually it is purely a thank you and that is it.
Right, it's very ceremonial, and you leave it at that.
Inserting a little
mean,
knife to
yeah.
twist is
I would
very-
say, yeah, but this was not very subtle. It
Well,
was like very,
yeah.
Sometimes it would be like hinted in between the lines. You would like, someone would give an analysis
No, and
and explain
Netanyahu
it.
is
but
a
yeah.
master of words. Like,
yeah,
we
I don't want to
know
get too
that-
far into it because
So are
that is
history
like
friends.
the big focus of the discussion that we have with our reporters later in this podcast. So I don't want to get into that too far, but I was really surprised if we're already talking about the IDF by the new policy set forth this week that says that IDF soldiers are no longer permitted to to be
Right.
on social media.
No, to be
To-
active on social
to be active
media
on social
Or
media.
during their service.
which
Yeah.
I think I don't know
get-
how
I-
I don't know how this hasn't happened up until now.
Wait,
No, I
just wanna say,
disagree.
at the beginning when the war first started and soldiers were all called up,
Mhm.
you didn't see much of anything. People didn't post so much, and then like people were off their phones,
No,
like,
people,
and
people
then
posted quite.
Not
I mean, with
everyone
people
was in
posted-
Gaza, Sarah,
No,
and a lot of
I
people were
know.
just, including, I don't know if you remember, it was like months in, there was a helicopter, an IDF helicopter, and someone like published a picture, and I think we were definitely speaking about it in the newsroom, where suddenly he's like taking a selfie on a helicopter with, you see bodies, and we were all like, oh, everyone was
Oh
like,
my
oh,
gosh.
it's this.
yeah,
And I was
yeah.
just like, why can't you?
no,
Like,
no, it's
where does that
crazy.
urge come
Listen,
from?
no,
Why
I
do you
don't-
have to publish that? Why?
But I think there's a massive difference between you are not allowed
Right, that's
to
extreme.
be on
That's
social
extreme.
media during your service altogether, and you are not allowed to show anything operational or be on uniform on
right,
social
you
media,
would
which is
think
reasonable.
It's common sense, and I think what
Which, by the way,
happened, what we saw happen during the war was that there were just more and more of posts coming out that were operational.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you just had to
No,
ask.
but
so
even
what?
non-operational, Hamas, in the probes that were published this week, it's
Right.
also on your list of things to discuss. So I hear, is
You were not involved in
I was
preparing.
not
it.
involved
Not
in
at
anything.
all.
It was SBN who created the list on her phone. Oh,
were-
the probes, Hamas, knew how to. They mapped out everything, every single base. Not
Right.
only according to stupid videos and photos
No,
the
they
IDF
knew
published,
every
but
inch of those
also because
places.
people. So even if you're sitting there at like a farewell party for your mashakitash, the person who's in charge of like
And you're
your
videotaping,
well-being,
yeah.
you're the social worker,
Yeah,
quote
yeah.
unquote, of the army, and you're just in a base and you see the base itself, that is giving information to our
It's
enemies.
so funny. When I was in the army when in 20 from 2014 to 2016, and the biggest
I was
like
in the army 10 years, even more than that. Before. Yeah,
before
earlier,
that. No, you
yeah.
weren't in the army for 10
Ugh, no.
years. No, but the biggest like stir up during my service was that Pokemon Go came out and it was mapping out army bases.
Oh my god! I forgot about that. It was a
So we
big
were-
deal.
So there was like a big
Yeah.
story of like
Wow.
soldiers are not allowed to use Pokemon Go, and as anybody
Yeah.
in the office is well aware, I'm a very big Pokemon Go fan, and I at the time was devastated, and I would wait until the second I was outside of base and
I'm
then
sure
immediately
Aaron
open
also
up.
is, right?
and
I have a
cer-
feeling. I don't
Aaron
know.
used to be. Aaron used to be.
Okay.
Aaron
Does
is
it
our
exist?
is the assistant managing editor of Jerusalem.
Does it?
Does Pokemon
com.
Go exist? That is
It is
offensive to
still-
me.
it is
yes,
still
it does. It has
quite
late
popular.
generation Pokemons, which is extremely upsetting to somebody who's in the OG crowd like me, and the original.
Okay.
And also it has legendary Pokemon, which it didn't have at first, other than like Kyogre. And okay, I'm getting really
I think
into
we're getting
detail.
sidetracked.
A little bit. Let's focus back on the, but the point is
ADHD.
the point is safety, security, and
I
Yeah,
support it. I
giving
don't know how this
also
hasn't happened up
a-
until now.
What?
And
you support
it
as
just-
extreme as it is, though.
Yes. I don't think it said you can't be active. Like anything that has to do with a photo of the army, whatever. By the way, another interesting thing: if your family comes to a ceremony of like you finishing some sort of course,
Mhm.
they're not allowed to eat. They're not allowed to take any footage either without it going through some sort of approval. So maybe like they'll have an official photographer there and send out photos.
Listen,
But like,
yeah, look, on
That's
the
a
one
big
hand, on the
deal.
one hand, I think it's common sense, and I have nothing to do with the army. It makes perfect sense to me to not allow any visuals to get out. That makes sense. On the other hand, I think I was recently at a family member's ceremony. You can't stop all
Right.
these families from taking photos of their
Right.
kids
That's
and their
difficult
grandkids.
because they're not in the
like,
system.
what are you gonna
They're
do?
not in the system.
Yeah,
I think it's like saying something extreme for it to like become more
to
moderate.
like push it forward. Yeah.
So people understand, I think it's.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is not on our list of things to discuss, but the amount of women,
We gotta stick to the
Straight
the
list.
amount of
Lisa.
women. You said you've never been in the army. The amount of women I've seen in the past, let's say year, but definitely the past few months, that have decided with children, not with whatever, all ages, to go into the IDF as like
I've experienced that
doing
as well. Yeah.
basic training and then
And they
through some
have
course
they
and
have these like
they're in reserves.
quickened courses
Yeah.
for them of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
basic
yeah.
training and things
and
like
and,
that.
and they do this and they'll say it straight out. It's because there are not enough people and they
It's
are
part
needed.
of the reason. It's part
a
of
lot
the
of
reason.
religious women as well. I
It's
think
part
Yeah.
of the reason that the
fascinating.
Haredi draft bill right now is such a big discussion in the Knesset, and that's also something that we're going to discuss in the next bit of the podcast. I do want to look real quick before we kind of switch over at the sheer number and also the energy and the horrific feel at the funerals of hostages who were returned that we have seen their funerals throughout the past few days.
Yeah.
It's been rough and
it's heart shattering. Like there's no other way to describe.
But we're
what's
also
being
kind of
said there.
becoming like our skin has become thicker, and it's difficult to keep on devoting yourself to that. You know what I'm saying? Like there was like certain
I
people in the
agree,
office. I'm not
but-
going to mention names that were like, I can't hear the funeral. I can't.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
No, I think
Not
it's
from a
really
negative
fair, and you have
way.
to
It's just
protect
like
yourself.
everyone has their own levels
Absolutely.
of that, but also you
But
know,
I think a really big silver lining in what we've seen in the funerals is the thousands of people who show
right.
up and stand.
It's usually
from
like
Tel
not at the
Aviv.
funeral itself. It's like where
No, it's on the way.
it's
and
on the way, right?
even
So they
more
stand on the sides of the
symbolic.
road, and they're from all backgrounds.
Everyone,
Almost all
and
backgrounds.
soldiers saluting,
Yeah.
and it's really
It's
for me
organic.
at least,
It's
it's been
grassroots.
this like
Nothing organized. Nothing. You know.
th-
just
this
people coming
represents
out.
who we are. This
Right.
is who we are.
You see people coming out and saying like, I just could not afford to not be here.
I'll
I don't
tell
know
you,
them. I never heard. You know. Like,
I'll
whatever.
tell you
Right.
what I feel, and this is my feeling. I might be completely wrong if this is like the general outlook. For me, it's almost a positive feeling because
Yeah.
because
Of
because
course.
these are hostages that a lot of them we already knew
There
that
is
they
a
were dead
sense of
before they-
relief there for
There's
sure.
a relief that they finally get their final resting place, which in Jewish culture is extremely vital.
Yeah.
But also there's this relief in what you said in the grassroots organic nature
Yeah.
of the sense of community
For
that
the
is-
families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this week has felt, even though it's been tense, even though there's concerns about, potential
War
fighting
continuing.
going on. Yeah. There has been this sense of like, we can
Yeah.
take a breath.
We can take a breath for a
Well,
second.
I think a bit more before the ceasefire ended. That was more of like finally things are
I
happening.
actually-
People are like the
yeah.
war is going to end. Like we're almost, you know what I'm saying? And then now it's very unclear. And I think in the discussion you'll
I
probably
mean,
get that.
I think one thing that we've discussed a bit in the newsroom as well is that one danger that can come out of the time period that we're in now is a type of complacency. Like we were all elated to see the first 3 female hostages come out,
Yeah.
and then the observer soldiers, and then you end up in a place where you feel kind of okay. You feel kind of okay, and we have to remember there are still
Yeah.
so many hostages
Plenty,
suffering, and they're like,
yeah.
we can't lose that momentum, especially as talks are more fragile by the minute.
Right. But also Hamas just
Talks are
doesn't want to
non-existent.
doesn't want to give them up in a sense. Like it's,
Well,
Of
I mean,
course- of
Yeah.
course.
so you
they
know what?
don't.
I think that's a great kind of
Segue.
transition segue into the discussion for today. Simply because we did discuss during we recorded this backwards. We did discuss.
as we say in Hebrew, en mukdam umuchar b'Torah.
That sounds-
Can you translate?
Guess that
th-
was
there's no early or late in the Torah.
There's
but,
no timeline.
For me, that
The
sounds
timeline for the
for me that's kind of Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Like a
Yeah.
wizard is never early or never late.
No, like
It's
it's
also-
not. It's not always in order of wait.
Order of
Nevertheless,
operations.
we discuss how there's a dehumanizing aspect in the way that the hostages are purely a bargaining chip to a terrorist organization like Hamas. So
Mhm.
with that, I'm going to switch over to my discussion with Eliav Breuer and Amichai Stein.
Send our regards.
Will do.
Okay.
Into the past.
Into the past.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Jinx. You guys have been so bored in your beats this week, right? So bored.
Nothing's going on.
Really, nothing. You guys are sitting around. It's honestly disappointing. Just kidding. Okay, so first of all, the biggest thing by far that came out, we're recording currently on Wednesday, and yesterday, on Tuesday, came to light this big kind of blow up of he said, she said surrounding the Shin Bet and its involvement on October 7th, knowledge about a potential attack prior to October 7th. So, I mean, whichever one of you wants to really kick it off, I want to hear how it impacts your respective side of the news, whether it's internal government, whether it's external diplomacy, and how this is going to impact things.
This. Okay, so Shin Bet has the ability to say these are the only things I want to put out, and it's very easy for him to do it. No one can say, okay, you need to put this out or go to the Supreme Court or something like that, and cause him to reveal much more things out. And that's the first part I think every one of us needs to remember when an organization that investigates himself publishes. Okay, also the IDF, it's the same story, because if you see the IDF investigation, these are more a list of events. It's not an investigation, so they are trying to understand a bit what happened, why did it happen, but it's mainly explaining what happened during the day and a bit why did it happen. And these two bodies have the ability to say this is under censorship, this is you can't reveal. I'll give you an example, short example. In the IDF investigation, there was the story about the SIMs that already on Thursday, before October 7th, were operated, okay? The censorship and the IDF decided not to publish this detail. The Shin Bet investigation did decide to publish this detail. So now we know that the first signs of October 7th were way off before October 7th, were already on October 5, but not between. So this is one thing we need to remember when we read this investigation. And the second thing is that the Shin Bet decided to do something here, which is more than an internal investigation. It decided to say that the diplomatic echelon, the prime minister, and the diplomatic view or way of thinking in the last several years were to keep quiet. And this was the thing that caused all hell to break loose at the end. Because this is not a part of what you were supposed to do while investigating yourself. Again, first problem is when you come to investigate yourself.
You're not supposed to investigate yourself. This is supposed to be a different body that's investigating. This is supposed to be, that's the entire point of the discussion that's happening right now surrounding a commission of inquiry.
Right, and that's really the story, because they're saying, yeah, we are investigating himself, but we still think that there needs to be a full committee that Supreme Court judge will appoint. And that, causes another major blow to the story between the Prime Minister and the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar. Because we know that Netanyahu wants to get rid of the head of the Shin Bet. Yeah. That's everyone's assumption. We know that. That's what Netanyahu is saying. But, it's very delicate right now because, there's the investigation regarding Qatar, which is in the Prime Minister office. So it might show, wait, you're taking the person who's heading an investigation because you don't like what he wants to reveal. But the story right now, Netanyahu doesn't trust the head of Israel's Shin Bet. We won't get into all the small details of what's going on, but this is the headline. Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, doesn't trust the person who is heading one of the most secretive intelligence body in Israel. And this is a situation that can go on, again, in my point of view.
So I was going to ask, how is this kind of like reflecting into the Knesset these days?
Yes, I think there are two figures who are very close to Netanyahu who work with him closely, who he can't wait to get rid of, which are Ronen Bar and the Attorney General Gali Barab Miara. Both of them have been basically essential gatekeepers in different ways since the formation of this government, and especially since October 7th. And I think that what we saw last night, which was this vicious response from the Prime Minister's office against the Shin Bet, was an example of the heightened tension and rhetoric that, in my opinion, another example of this was in the Knesset earlier this week when Netanyahu, in this fire and brimstone speech, started attacking the deep state and the media, and especially the term deep state is a term that he hasn't used.
And it's one commonly used, at least
it's one commonly used, yes,
in context of conspiracy theories
and he
like QAnon.
And one last sentence is that he actually said, if the U.S. president can attack the deep state, can counter the deep state, then I can too. And this shows, I think, as an example, that Netanyahu feels a backwind now with Trump and whatever he's doing in the administration. He feels a backwind that he can act more than he used to do against the Shin Bet and against the Attorney General.
Yeah, some people say that, to continue what you're saying, that after his visit to Washington and his meeting with Trump, he came back, saying, wow, he can sign an executive order and things go the way he wants. Right. He can take these people out, do whatever he wants, change the government as he wants. take people out, change, appoint whoever. And this caused him to be very frustrated. And to continue, you have these deep state is something we hear. Okay, we heard from right wing Israeli journalists, but up until now, this was not the theme of the prime minister. It was a theme that we had U.S. politicians talking about, or even Israeli politicians talking about. But when the prime minister comes and says this publicly, this is, I think, kind of a result of what he sees happening in the U.S. That again, he can do whatever he wants. He can fire the head of the chief of staff. He can fire. If he can fire whoever he wants, and here Netanyahu is stuck because the Supreme Court, and it's a bit frustrating for him. That's his feeling. Okay, right now that he can't do whatever he wants. But I'll say another thing. Netanyahu always likes someone to blame. That's another thing we need to remember. Okay, he always likes. When he and if you look at the past year and a half, these people and the strategy helped him at the end, because he had Gantz and Eisenkot. He blamed them. Again, they quit the government. Then he moved to the second one, which was the defense minister back then, Gallant. Gallant went out. Then you had all the focus on Herzi Halevi. Herzi Halevi resigned, and now all the focus is on two people, on Ronen Bar and the Attorney General. At the end, Netanyahu, what he's doing here is saying, all these people are responsible for all your problems, okay?
And these are the same people who are saying that the political echelon does have some level of responsibility for what happened on October 7th. Ronen Bar is saying it from a Shin Bet perspective, and Gali Baharav is also saying it from not just a judicial perspective relating to also the investigation, but also in terms of the judicial reforms that were the biggest crisis in Israel before.
Yeah.
But he was prime minister for the last 15 years, so we need to remember it always when we speak about responsibility. So it's correct that on October 7th or October 6th, he wasn't woken up. They didn't call him. He isn't responsible for what happened on that day as the events of that day, but the strategy, the idea not going after Hamas heads, not going for assassination, not opening operations against Hamas with Israel's decision to do it, and not Hamas opening fire on Israel, and then Israel decides to go further. I had a story, for example, that during Operation Tzuk Eitan back then in 2014, Netanyahu didn't want to discuss Israel going into a ground operation in Gaza, a full-scale operation in Gaza. And 5 ministers in the security cabinet back then, including some that didn't think it's a good idea, but said, we need to discuss this issue in the cabinet. This should be put on the table. And what Netanyahu did at the end, leaked this presentation saying there will be 100 of soldiers dead if Israel goes, and at the end, the cabinet didn't vote on it. But there were ministers who told him, listen, you can't take this option off the table and not discuss it. And Netanyahu, of course, didn't want it. And so we're at a point that the question is, okay, let's say Ronen Bar is fired, and the Attorney General will be fired or quit. I don't know. The question comes, who will Netanyahu blame afterwards if there's any trouble or any problem? Because Netanyahu always likes to have someone to blame.
Yeah,
I think every politician likes to have someone to blame.
There's a reference that I really love to make, and I make it a lot on this podcast, to a comedian named John Mulaney, who had a very famous skit in which he described Trump becoming the U.S. president as a horse set loose in a hospital. It's never happened before. You don't know what to compare it to. And my favorite thing that he said is that they hire a horse catcher in the hospital, and then the horse comes forward and says, I have fired the horse catcher. And I feel like that's kind of Netanyahu's approach right now in terms of anybody who's trying to even partially point blame at the political echelon.
Yeah, and I want to just add on to what both of you are saying, which is we should remember that the strategy for Netanyahu now is to try to survive as long as possible until he can make the next big splash. For example, a peace with Saudi Arabia that'll kind of cement his legacy looking forward, so that October 7th won't be his lasting legacy. But in order to survive, he needs to be able to, to overcome certain things that can bring him down, such as certain criminal investigations, his ongoing trial, public opinion, and perhaps most importantly, the Public Commission of Inquiry, which is what he was talking about in his speech this week when he came out so forcefully against it. So I think that what we're seeing in his response to Ronen Bar and in basically his statements and his actions in the past few weeks speak to his attempt, despite growing pressure, also including from bereaved families, to avoid state commission of inquiry.
But when you look at it, it's really crazy that up until now, a year and a half of the war, no official committee was formed. Okay,
Just because of these internal arguments.
yeah, you know, at the end, you could. I'm sure you can find a mechanism that even let's say I don't know if Lapid, but Gantz can agree with Netanyahu on some kind of mechanism. And again, this is an investigation. It should happen at the end. It's not only for the question who was in charge of what happened on October 7th. There are much more things to take out of this committee for the next time. Look, at the end, Yom Kippur War, head of the Agranat committee. At the end, decisions or ideas from this committee changed the way Israel has been conducting things. Okay, it didn't work 50 years later. But at the end, these committees have a role not only to point a finger at the person who was to blame for what happened, but try and understand what happened, understand maybe the bodies are not working the best, maybe there needs to be change, maybe you need to establish something new. But again, look at the Agranat Committee after the Yom Kippur War, and here the intelligence failure is much more bigger than Yom Kippur. You can't even compare the two, because back then the intelligence was, but the idea of the people who made the decision was that Egypt and Syria doesn't want war. Here, you didn't have the intelligence, the full picture. You had the conception that Hamas doesn't want war, and you know, it's an event that was for almost 10, 15 years Hamas grew in Gaza. So that's what drives me crazy. That the end, that there's of course some kind of form, but Netanyahu doesn't want it. He's so much afraid of pointing even the slightest finger at him that he doesn't want it. But at the end, when you look at his voters, or you look at this coalition, they won't blame him. That's the story. Whatever this committee, we're at the point in Israeli politics that whatever the committee decides, people who trust Netanyahu won't blame him. Those who won't trust Netanyahu won't blame him. That's a story. So I don't understand what's the big panic in the story.
I think the big panic is ultimately what a commission of inquiry would kind of come out saying, because the Israeli public tends to adopt something as official as that, and something as official as that needs to be properly representative of what the commission needs to uphold, and that's where the argument is. Netanyahu is convinced, and justifiably so, that if he has a political commission of inquiry made up of MKs from his coalition, of course, then the finger will not even consider pointing towards his government, his coalition, and as you said, his legacy ultimately. So it's this ongoing like existential fear in Netanyahu that we've seen consistently throughout his entire political career. I want to turn now to one of the bigger kind of deal breakers that are happening right now within the coalition, which is the Haredi draft subject, which has been on and off the table for years and years and years, and now has become kind of this, I don't know, like this festering wound in the coalition. Because on the one hand, the right wing has consistently been very, very pro-IDF. On the other hand, especially surrounding October 7th, in an attempt to at least partially avoid blame, but also out of some justifiable criticism, they have fully blamed the security systems for everything that's happening right now. Nevertheless, they have to kind of balance that with the need to uphold the IDF, strengthen the soldiers, and ultimately, that's where the Haredi draft discussion works its way in, because on the one hand, this is a right-wing coalition with very religious elements that are opposed to a Haredi draft. On the other hand, there is the issue of wanting to strengthen the IDF, having as many people as possible on hand, because as we all know right now, the situation in the IDF in terms of manpower is very, very difficult. I don't think I know a single person who doesn't know either.
Listen, I was shocked
reservist or-
to meet a friend on a few days ago and told me he got an invitation,
Summons.
summoned to 90 days of I told him they are still recruiting for 90 days. I was completely shocked,
Yeah,
when he
it's
told
still
me
happening.
90 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
let me just. First of all, I think it's ironic that after October 7th and the war, it's actually this issue of drafting Haredim, which has been an issue for decades, is actually the one that is a little destabilizing. But I just want to mention a few things that happened the past few days.
Yeah.
Because this thing is evolving. So just today, the Attorney General, just a few hours ago, put out a letter saying that the IDF and the government isn't even meeting the basic numbers of Haredim it itself committed to draft in the past few months, and it was required by law to step up enforcement. The reason it came out now is because the IDF works on 3-month cycles.
Yeah.
Which starts in July. So the first 3-month cycle ended in November, and the second 3-month cycle ended at the end of February. So now, at the beginning of March, the numbers are starting to come out of how many Haredim went to the army
right.
in February. So that's one thing. And a second thing is that we have the budget coming up, right? The 2025 budget,
Yeah.
by law, it's supposed to pass by the end of 2024. It didn't.
Shocker.
But if it doesn't pass by March 31st, then the government falls automatically. And that date is fast approaching. And there's a big question now if the Haredim are going to insist on some form of maybe not even if the bill passing into law, but on an agreement or a written agreement about a concession by the government if they demand this as a condition for them to support the...
Which was previously the case. They had previously demanded this.
But now they seem to be hesitating, and there's also differences between the Haredi parties. The reason is because the Haredi parties are sort of threatening with an empty gun. Because even if they quit the government falls, we go to an election, the legal status now, with barring any other law, is that every 18-year-old Israeli has to go into the army.
Yeah.
So time is against them. So there's a political game going on about how exactly, what are they going to do and what leverage do they have?
But they
on
have
the
their
Prime
rabbis,
Minister.
which is a factor.
Right. The Haredi politicians are basically, they have influence on the rabbis, but at the bottom line, they vote according to their respective rabbinical councils. The rabbis are men, much older. Sometimes they aren't necessarily in tune with what's going on the street, and there are a lot of voices and growing voices on the street. Even from our lives, I've heard about more and more Haredim who are again, it's a process, but people who are more interested, more open after October 7th. But these voices
Well,
aren't.
there's still, I feel like still the vast majority, at least that we see publicly, of
Yes.
the ultra-Orthodox community is very, very opposed. Our offices in central Jerusalem are all too aware of their opposition because we're the ones who get the skunk spray floating into the office. It's extremely unfortunate. But even a minor change within this community is quite significant because until now, this was the status quo. It was this understanding that they get this, special exception.
But that's the debate amongst I know even people inside the coalition who might agree on something small, but some of them will tell you that after conversations with the Haredim in the last few months, at the end they understand it's only a trick. Okay, so they would agree for if you can put the law on the table, which will recruit, let's say, several thousands of, 3,000, 4,000. Even if it's the first step, okay, they would have voted for him. But a lot of people, even from the opposition that at the beginning said there's room on what to talk about, have the feeling right now that the idea is to find a trick law, meaning not a real law that will cause the Haredim to go in. And the biggest question is, will there be personal sanctions on a person who is supposed to be recruited and won't come to the army at the end? Because this is very significant, because if you have personal sanctions on the person and not only on the yeshiva, not only on the place it is, this is very significant. And the question, of course, also which sanctions are you
So
putting
actually,
on him?
just for our audience that might not know this, Eliav, can you just clarify the basic, where we're currently at in terms of these sanctions according to law?
So right now, there is a bill being prepared in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. The bill is based on a bill that passed in 2022. It passed its first reading. The bill basically, as it stands now, is not in tune at all with the Army's needs. The bill basically says that a certain number of increasing number of Haredim, like what Amichai said before, a few thousand increasing will grow gradually, while will also exempt a lot of Haredim into the workforce, so as not to incentivize them to continue staying in the yeshivot for next period of time.
Right.
So everyone agrees on paper that that's not viable. However, the fact on the ground is that in the committee, the committee chairman, Yuli Edelstein, is going paragraph by paragraph on the 2022 bill. He hasn't offered a new bill,
Right.
and so the opposition at the beginning took his word that no,
2022 meaning
yeah.
well before October 7th,
Seventh.
2023.
So they're
The needs
calling-
of the army were completely different.
exactly
It's a completely different
so,
reality.
So they use this phrase, it's like an open book. He said, no, we're just using this law as a framework, but really we're gonna, completely change it. But as the discussions evolve, it becomes clear that they aren't really changing it. They're playing a little bit with the numbers, but there isn't a paradigm shift. And that's why I think a lot of people are starting to question what the government intends to do. And I want to just give one example. The basic, there's a fundamental question about the Haredi draft, which is, we call it michsim versus yadim, michsot versus yadim. Yadim means all the Haredim are exempt from the army, and there's going to be an X amount, growing number of Haredim who have to go into the army every year. That's one approach. The second approach is the opposite. All Haredim have to go into the army. That's the default. And there can be an X number of Haredim who can be exempt in order to study in yeshivot. Now, the assumption of the previous law was that everybody is exempt and X number have to go in. Now, all of the discussions now are working off of that same assumption. All Haredim are exempt, but we'll increase the numbers. But then the opposition are going, wait a second. Why should all the Haredim be exempt as a default? That's first of all, it's not fair. Second of all, it's the same as what it was before. This whole thing has to change, and that hasn't even been discussed at all in the
Right.
Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee after months of deliberation. So there's a fair sense, based on fact, that this might be a trick, as Amichai said.
And by the way, you need the problem of Netanyahu, to bring it on the table straight away, is again that there are MPs and ministers inside the coalition, inside his coalition, who said they won't vote in favor of the current bill, which is on the table.
Right.
If there were full support, Netanyahu would have easily brought it to the table, do a vote. Okay, so the opposition would have said whatever it wants, and that's it. But that's a story now that you have inside.
Mhm.
So these are not people, I think, that would take down the government. But at the end, you need them to get some kind of majority, and you need them also to get the moral majority for this idea.
Right.
Because there are ministers and MPs over there that if you can get their support, it gives you a moral,
It's so
some kind of
interesting.
moral
though.
issue to this bill.
It's so interesting to me. Something that's always kind of bothered me is that this doesn't seem to actually stir any discussion internationally. Our international allies, our partners abroad, and just in general, news coverage internationally doesn't really seem to take much interest in Haredi draft, when ultimately I feel like it's a huge, huge difference in how our society operates that is ultimately negatively impacting how we can operate militarily.
I won't say they're completely not interested, because they're interested in one main question: does it make Netanyahu's government fall? So that's the focus at the end. They don't want to know if there's 3,000 Haredim or 4,000 Haredim that will be recruited. That's not their interest. The question is that, again, at the end, is this law going to take down Netanyahu government or not? That's the main question. So I wouldn't say they're not interested, but that's the story right now.
I want to add that I think that within Haredi communities, and the Haredi community in the United States, and international Haredi communities, this is a relatively big issue. Again, not from a standpoint of how should we serve the country, but how do we keep the world of Torah study. A lot of this doesn't come out because the Haredi world in general and the media is very hierarchical and controlled, so we don't hear
And
a lot.
also closed off. It's
Yeah,
very
and also
independent.
close off. But we did see at the beginning we saw a delegation of top tier Israeli Haredi rabbis going to the United States for a fundraiser to in case the money stops for the yeshivot, and they were quite successful. And so again, that's an indication of the fact that it seems at the moment that the especially American Haredi community is in tune with the rabbis here who want to avoid IDF service. But it's true. It's considered basically a domestic issue, and we don't hear about it a lot.
What it ultimately impacts though is how the IDF operates and how the IDF operates and how the immediate future of the war goes affects how an eventual ceasefire will look. So let's take a look real quick. Amichai, where are we at right now in terms of any future of potential additional ceasefires?
So let's point where again we are on Wednesday. And
Yeah.
Can we say the time? Because we need to be
It
accurate.
is 11:24 in the morning.
Okay. So based on the time and the day we are
At this
right now,
specific
at this
moment,
specific moment, nothing's really happening. No, that's the truth.
Yeah.
Again, probably the what's called the Witkoff idea won't happen. Okay, let's put it down the table. Again, probably won't happen because you want to really Hamas won't give up. I'm sorry to call them like this, but the hostages are his leverage at the end. So he won't give half of the living hostages at the beginning and half the end and agree to a 42 day ceasefire. That won't happen. There is some kind of assumption that you can get more releases. But again, up until a certain point, because Hamas will want to keep the hostages if Israel doesn't give him a full ceasefire and a cessation of the war. So the assumption you can get maybe, for 2 weeks, maybe for a few weeks, Hamas might agree to release some hostages and you will bring in the caravans that he really wants. We're talking about 60,000 that he wants and things like that. But right now it's a bit, and we have, let's say, Israel has some kind, I'll call it a virtual deadline, which is probably next week. Up until next week, Israel won't go to a full-scale war because we had a new chief of staff, the army going in,
yes.
and he needs to do more meeting, arrange things. You need things on the ground, but
Administrative things.
not administrative, but not before, let's say, next week. That's again the assumption. Okay, it's not a deadline that was sent to Hamas that you've got 10 days or a week and a half. If not, we're going back. But that's again the assumption. So again, I understand that in the last few days or the last week there wasn't anything, So there was again the Witkoff idea, but Hamas said no. Although the mediator said that he didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. So he's open. So that's why people feel that Hamas might agree to some kind of a release of hostages in return again for release of terrorists from prison and more days of ceasefire.
Yeah.
But right now, really nothing is moving in that direction. Again, the assumption is a lot of people say that Witkoff can close the deal, but no one knows exactly when it will come, and some say it will come only to close the deal. So there needs to be something. That's the point we're right now.
I just want to ask you one question, Amichai. One thing I wasn't clear about, the Philadelphia corridor. Didn't Israel commit to
Evacuating it?
evacuating
On the
it
day-
by day 50?
Yes. So the agreement says day 50, but there's a judicial interpretation that day 50 is if you go to stage 2. Okay, and then the counting really continues. But if technically the deal ends, the ceasefire ended on day 42, Israel and Hamas decided to continue the ceasefire at the end.
Uh-huh.
So that's an interpretation. Yes, so you have an agreement. You have an agreement on the table, but and let's say the truth. Right now, U.S. is giving you full backing.
Right.
Okay, for every move you want for the stopping of the humanitarian aid. So Hamas knows probably he won't get. Hamas knows he won't get it at the end, so he's trying maybe to get as much as he can. That's why I'm saying probably the Witkoff initiative won't be materialized at the end, and all the hostages will come back. But on day 44 to the ceasefire, Israel will go back to war. So, the assumption is that you can't get some kind of release. There's no 100%, okay, as opposed to the optimism I heard maybe last week. There's less optimism that there's less 100% right now. But the assumption is you can get agreement on some more releases.
Hey, but it's only 11:24, so who knows?
Yeah.
Now 11:20 something else.
Okay.
11:29. But I want to turn real quick to how these discussions are looking in the government itself. Is there any movement towards? Because I'll tell you what, from an outside perspective, from somebody who's watching Israeli news on the day-to-day basis, what we're seeing is hostage families on the regular going to the Knesset, going to these discussions, to the Vada Pniyot HaTzibur,
Yeah.
which I don't know how to translate.
State Knesset committee responsible for hearing complaints. against,
Yes, and
against-
they're holding up posters of their loved ones who are either still held or have died, and they are getting virtually no conversation whatsoever. Is there any advancement in terms of just internal discussions about whether or not like hostages matter?
I think just first of all, it's a great question. I think that certainly the first stage, phase one, definitely affected. It definitely affected public opinion, both because we saw what the situation of the hostages were when they came, also because we got a lot of new signs of life from the hostages who came home about remaining hostages. So we know now a lot more about their situation.
Yeah.
And Hamas, not I would say wisely from their view made sure to show these horrible videos of live hostages watching the release of others to try to affect public opinion in favor of creating
Psychological
pressure.
warfare.
Psychological
is a
warfare.
powerful thing.
On the other hand, we know that there's a lot of pressure from within the government and a lot of pressure on the ground in Israel to obliterate Hamas militarily, to go back into war. We have Smotrich, for example, pushing to a point where the government, as it stands now, cannot agree to a permanent ceasefire in exchange for the rest of the hostages, which is what Hamas wants. It can't. So now they're trying to play with all. The families are pushing, and we have pressure being applied from all. And families are actually also trying to apply pressure on Trump. Right, we see families,
Yeah.
as opposed to meeting with Netanyahu, they're going to Trump to try to get him. So we see this pressure playing out, and in the interim, we hear from Amichai the different, how this is going to play out on the ground and what we can maybe see in the next few days and whatnot. So
But I think there's one point, we're talking about a cessation of war, but people need to understand, I think, that the idea of cessation of war doesn't mean you can go the next day back fighting.
Yeah.
Because you find that Hamas is smuggling rockets. Probably Hamas will want a cessation of the war for a long time, a long period, and this will allow him to enter ammunition and regroup, and him becoming again a force in Gaza. So people need to understand that. I think the idea of signing with Hamas a deal to release them all for a cessation of war doesn't mean that Israel can go back to fighting like we're seeing, for example, in Lebanon. Hamas probably will be much more smarter when he does the deal. Will ask for guarantees. So it basically leaves him in the same place and allows him to become more stronger, a deal like that, because that's probably the guarantees he would want to ask.
Well, let's hope things get a little bit better. Amichai, Eliav, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to give it a like, comment, subscribe. You can reach us at podcast@jpost.com, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, jpost.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be well.